movie seems to me like it would be not only enormously logistically and physically challenging, but also kind of emotionally and mentally taxing. And I'm curious for you, not only what attracted you to it in the first place, but did you have any reservations or hesitations or concerns going in?
I had tremendous concerns about the landscape. I'm not a fan of snakes, alligators. I took it primarily because of the story. Also Will Smith, I think. That's one. And I think it really delivered on something that's very important to talk about. And, you know, in this particular case, it is sort of a story about, in my opinion, a man who's so deeply in love, fought very hard to return to what he loved most, and along the way had to persevere with some of the hardest things we can imagine.
And so what were your initial conversations like with Antoine in terms of figuring out what the kind of guiding principles are going to be?
Antoine's, when we first started speaking about, said he wanted to be brutal and beautiful. That's extraordinarily complicated to do, I think, to find beauty and yet be able to tell an extraordinarily brutal tale. That's also filled with a high level of spiritual, and the impact was meant to be highly spiritual. I hope some of that came across, and the love he felt, you know, for his family and for his fellow man.
And so, in terms of figuring out that brutality and beauty, everything, I mean, did you have any kind of reference points? Were there any other movies or photography or anything like that you were thinking of in terms of influences?
No, we went off the photograph in terms of the movement towards that black and white look that you see primarily. It does shift. We obviously have a little bit more color, and we oscillated that color so that it would also influence the way one scene to another would be impacted. From something that was cooler or warmer to something that went to near black and white and back, so that you would feel differently. And I hope that has worked. It's something that for pretty much most of my life we've been playing with. Everyone that's in the business certainly plays with.
And in terms of figuring that out, like modulating the color and how much you're going to have, how little you're going to have, are there intellectual strategies for that, or is it more of an intuitive process?
It was essentially going to go strongly black and white. And early tests with Rob Legato, a lookup table was put together, a grade on set, so that I have, in this particular case, someone from Company 3 in a trailer working on a resolve, and we're grading the dailies every day. And we found that the path of early tests was black and white work, but I was more influenced by trying to tint certain sequences, and they might go shot to shot, not even sequence to sequence. And we explored that and found that it was too heavy-handed, and we started to slide backwards towards black and white and periodically bring in the tonalities of the fire, some of the greens, and to allow the blues to shift sometimes for nights when I generally am not a great fan of this sort of one-color process, and a little bit of that was influenced out of the work early with Aviator, where we worked with multiple color. So.
And yeah, now you mentioned Rob Legato, the visual effects supervisor, and you worked with him, I believe, on Hugo, Aviator, maybe some other things. Talk a little about that collaboration. What's that?
Extraordinarily close to Rob. He's one of the most brilliant collaborators I've ever had the fortune to work with. His mind is superior, and he's relentless, and he's a incredible second unit director, and not just visual effects, because a lot of this work, there's some second unit in here, and he's responsible for some of the most beautiful shots here. And for helping to create, for example, the battle, we didn't know how, original concept with Antoine was to make it one shot. It just started and moved all the way around and ended up on Will. And we were going to end the movie at one point with Will being blown up, and you didn't know whether he lived or died. And then we realized that that wasn't quite going to work out. This single shot became a torment, a huge thorn on all of our sides. So we shifted, and editorial, they went a different route entirely and made it much more impactful, and we certainly shot more shots than one, and, as you can see, but and that was the original intention, was to try to do, it's all done with the cable cam, so it's not done with drones, or we had some drone work, but mostly cable cam and remote cranes.
Well, you've got there are some interesting shots in this movie, some sort of long takes, unbroken takes, like the scene where Smith is going through that house, and you can do that long, unbroken take. I mean, talk a little bit about what the thinking was there, why you guys wanted to do it that way, and how you executed it.
Which one did you?
You know, when Will Smith goes into that house, towards the climax.
Oh, you mean the house on fire?
Yeah.
Well, at that point we were working, we found a rhythm in terms of, because our first sequence of shooting was the railroad. And it was Antoine's concept to take Will into the darkest place, so that he didn't start with the family. He didn't chronologically work out from the family. He started with a place that would be cruel and brutal. And Louisiana that time of year, cruelty is an understatement. And this film was, got hit by hurricanes, all Louisiana did, and we'd also left Georgia, so for reasons of voting, as most of you probably already know. And so in that particular, we found a rhythm of the longer shots, less cuts, taking more time, letting the scene unfold. And that sequence, that one shot, is specifically geared exactly towards that same concept that was begun with some of the earlier shots in the railroad, like lifting the ties, moving the tie to one place, coming across Ben in the foreground, or lifting him up as he's carrying some wood out, and the man dives in the foreground and carries him around. It's like we started to take our time with development of shots and not to rush them and to overcover. That left a lot of producers extraordinarily nervous. Do you think maybe we could get something else? I don't know. I'm pretty sure nobody really wants to. We're going to move on, I think. Antoine, we're going to move on? Yeah, we're going to move on. Antoine was very much in that spirit. And he's remarkable. He did a great job with believing in that process of more of the single takes.
Yeah, like it makes it really absorbing for the viewer, I think, and it really draws you to this character, as does Will Smith's performance. And I'm curious for you, as a cinematographer, for a movie like this that hinges so much on such a central, strong performance, how do you see your role in terms of creating an environment to facilitate the best work of the actor? Is that something you think about, or is that...
Oh no, absolutely. I want to support Will as much as possible and to create an atmosphere that is where his mind is at and where Antoine is looking to emphasize moments of the brutality, if it be the brutality or whatever he does want to demonstrate. And so, yeah, I work very much. I think that I grew up shooting initially with people who were word men, Oliver Stone, and when you work that way, I never really saw myself I always saw myself as trying to shoot a film based upon the concepts that are within the film, and not so much to try to make my work beautiful despite their words or the subject matter. And that was, so I'm highly supportive of this story and character.
Yeah, you mentioned, not liking snakes and all that kind of thing. And when I was watching this movie, this is the third time I've seen the movie, actually, and watching it again tonight, I just was looking at the scenes in the swamp and wondering how on earth you got those elegant camera moves, because I don't even know how do you even get your equipment in there?
It was very hard to get the gear inside there. We had a 75 Techno. We build roads into places. We also had, I think they call it a Sherpa, but we call it something else. It's a truck that has basically a 50-foot crane on it, but it's been built for, I think it's a lumber truck from Italy, the base. So you can move it pretty much anywhere in the arm. The post will level up. This is probably too technical for anyone, but that's what we utilize. So we could get it into very, very difficult places without having to level out. Like with the 75 Technos and things like that, you have to level those out. I didn't have to level, so our crane could get into places, and we cut some roads and pathways through mud, and the Scarpa had the capability of actually getting through that, through deep mud, four-wheel.
Did you actually encounter snakes and alligators and stuff like that when you were there?
Yeah, I mean, they said that those ponds were all safe, those swamps were all safe. I can let you rest assured that Will walked into many places and so did all the characters and all the people who were working on the movie. There were many alligators, and there are so many snakes. I forgot how many they caught a day. It was not playtime, but no one got injured in any way. It was an extraordinarily difficult shoot.
Well, I think we've got some time for some audience questions before we get into Platoon, if anybody has any, and I'll repeat the questions so that people can hear it. Yeah.
Since you're still working, how do you feel having a retrospective about you and all your work at the...
I hate it. I was kind of dismayed by the fact that it was going to be a retrospective. And I talked to a friend of mine. She said, well, it's better get it out before you pass away. I didn't take that very kindly. Yeah.
Mira? Yeah. You mentioned you were using like a special Italian lumber truck. You know, that way that it does like an automatic leveling.
It's not automatic, but yeah, you can level it, and it's used quite a bit. I used it on the last show as well.
Well, for inspiring filmmakers who want to try to do something like that, like how easy or difficult it is to get a truck like that, or how much funding do you need to get something like that if you want to do those like amazing camera angles in that kind of difficult
It's pretty
environment?
serious income.
Oh.
But there is very little opportunity to utilize other material. Drones can only go so far to get you into places without having a reaction with the environment, with the propeller. So you have that, and also safety reasons overhead, and you're limited in many, many ways. And I call it a Scarpa, but they call it a Sherpa. That truck is highly capable of getting to the most distinctly impossible locations. It's worth the money.
Yes, up towards the back.
Yes, I have two questions. The first one is, could you tell us like what kind of camera that you use when you're shooting? And then it's like the second one is, like when Will Smith climb up in the tree and a lot of, take the honey. So like you guys use the drone, or you have to climb up the same level to shoot?
So two questions. The first was what kind of camera you used, and the second was for the scene with Will Smith up in the tree, how you shot that.
The camera we used was red. We worked with red and Panavision lenses. It was shot flat, and but format basically 239 or 240, whatever you want to call it. And the image, the shot you're talking about when Will was in the tree, was shot with a Scarpa at 50 feet. So we were able to get up high enough and above him to move across the top of the trees.
You mentioned that it was shot with 239, 240 aspect ratio. What kind of factors go into deciding what aspect ratio you're going to shoot in? Do you generally prefer that wider canvas?
I actually have very different opinions about that. I think the format should be changing more often in a movie. That it doesn't need to stay 185 or 166 or 133 or 240. And I feel that movies should be able to, audiences are at a point where they can see it now. And it doesn't need to stay in black and white, it doesn't need to be in color. It should be able to oscillate more with the emotion of whatever the story is. So I've done a lot of anamorphic work or widescreen work because it seems to be a favorite format at this point. Because television essentially is really 185, but slightly wider in terms of height, slightly higher. So I think it's worth moving as much as possible into different ways of looking at it format-wise.
Yes.
Your shots with the animals, the dogs running and the horses running, were just incredibly, like absolutely beautiful. And I always think, how hard was it filming with the animals and getting that? Because, I mean, that was just, I've honestly not seen something so beautiful in such a long time. How many takes did you have to do? Like, how did you set it up? Like,
The question was about getting the shots of the animals.
Those animal shots you saw with the birds,
the dogs and the horses, the running, the chasing.
oh, the
that was
horses,
just
yeah.
amazing.
They were done with camera cars primarily to get some of that speed. We would find paths that we could drive the camera car down, edge, and keep it stabilized enough to be able to shoot those shots and set them up with that because you needed the speed at which to accomplish it. And that was only capable that way. We used very, very rough terrain, so it wasn't necessarily you were creating roads. And they utilized the best sections of what we were able to achieve.
They're amazing.
Thank you.
Wow, okay. Yeah, go over to the side. Yep.
Yeah, I was just wondering, could you talk a little about like the approach to shooting such large-scale battle scenes, and I guess your specific approach to that?
The question was about your approach to shooting such large-scale battle scenes.
This is the largest battle scene I think I've hit yet. The earlier ones with Platoon and Born in the Fourth, and also I think Snowfall and Cedars were more limited in terms of this was epic, but also epic in the sense of its scale. But we also had no time. It was very limited time, and so what was created was highly fortunate. The black and white that we utilized helped us in many ways to get past the issues that most cinematographers have, or even anyone shooting with light. I'm not a fan of sunlight. It's too high, too fast, and down there with COVID, you could have a 7 o'clock call, you'd have an hour drive, 7 o'clock call, and you would have to wait 45 minutes in a parking lot until you were told you were negative. And then you had another 20 minutes to get to the set, and then people were eating breakfast. So by the time you came out to shoot, you're sitting at 10 o'clock. And at 10 o'clock in Louisiana, the sun's almost right overhead for the rest of the day, because shooting days, they only want to do a 10-hour shooting day because they don't have to break for lunch. A lot of things go on that. So the black and white helped me in many ways get past some of the issues I would have had I gone to color. Also, I believe that color was too distracting. That's what Antoine and I immediately found, that when we went to color, we were losing focus on the characters, but also the situation. We wanted something that felt more desperate, and it wasn't desperate enough in color. It was a little too, I'm not going to say hallmark, but it's in that zone. It was like, it just was unattractive. For the story, for this particular story.
Yes.
Hey, thanks so much for your work, and awesome to see you here. You mentioned bringing the spiritual aspects into the shooting, and like I've just loved all of your work. Feels like it's got character and I don't know, a spirit to it. How do you bring spirit into your work?
The question is about bringing the spirituality into the work.
How I do it, I don't actually know how I do it, and if I do it, I think the films do it, the words do it, and it's, my work is trying to be as much a reflection of what is being painted by the writers and the directors and the actors, and rather me. If I have anything spiritual, I haven't quite found it yet.
Well, yeah, that raises a question for me, which is, at this point in your career, what motivates your choices when you decide to take on a movie? I mean, is it mostly the material? Is it why you work with certain directors? Why you work with certain actors? All the above?
It's all. I mean, I've not worked with that many directors. It's a lot of repetition with Oliver, with Quentin, with and Marty. So those are three primary. I worked with John Sayles twice. Most directors I try to work with multiple times. This is Antoine's second film that I worked with Antoine. And I mean, this was the first, but I worked on another, just finished with him. And I think that directors are, Antoine became a brother in this movie to me, so we joke about it. It's like, we're brothers from a different mother, but we are definitely brothers. I love that man. And, but all those things bring it to me. It's what I want to make. I don't have any desire to not shoot. I would like to take a break for a month or two, but I don't know how that's going to work out.
Yes.
Yeah, was this show single cam or multicam? And then what are your general feelings about single versus multi-camera?
The question is about if you shot this with a single camera or multiple cameras, and what your general feelings are about that.
My general feeling is washing anything down with multiple camera angles is not exactly what I would like to be doing. You know, in battle sequences, things like that, you know you're in a position to have to do a certain amount of that. The majority of directors I work with are single camera, most of the time, or two, but not much more than two, unless you're in a situation that we like talked about, major special effects. I prefer a more focused approach to cinema. I think Quentin has said it best, that I direct, I don't select.
Hi, Mr. Richardson. You talked a little bit about how this film being mostly in black and white helped like with the like lighting situation or like with the sun position. But in general, do you approach black and white cinematography and color cinematography differently? And how do you like approach the cinematography of this film when it's like a color cinematography, but that's almost in black and white?
So the question was about whether or not you approach black and white and color cinematography differently.
Yeah, definitely. I approach color and black and white.
Like the lighting wise, sorry.
Light-wise?
Yeah, lighting wise.
I work strongly towards putting things in backlight when I'm working in color. Principally because in backlight you have shadow on the face. And if you're in weather situations, you can hide the issues more easily when you're in the digital intermediate room. So I try to avoid dealing with frontal light because it becomes so obvious from one shot to the next what's just taking place. So even color and black and white, I try to do the same thing. I don't shoot that much black and white. I do love to take the color out of color film and make it less chromatic in most cases, unless I'm going for something that's Kodachrome or Ektachrome or 3-color or something like that. Yeah.
I have really just kind of a two questions if I may ask. One's a cliche, if you don't mind. This move over the past couple of decades to more of a digital universe, and you're a classical filmmaker. You've made some of the greatest films I've ever seen, and one we're about to watch. And I'm just curious, when this movement took place, this metamorphosis, pushing this digital spectrum, this 4K, 8K, what was your opinion to that, and how did you feel when you saw this change? And the second is, I'm very curious about how you managed to shoot. The film we're going to watch now was beautifully captured from the vantage point of the foot soldier. It's the first movie of its kind, and it give you that experience of being in an actual battle. I'm curious about how you were able to accomplish that.
So it's a two-part question. The first part is the feelings on the movement towards digital. And then the second one is about Platoon, which we're going to watch next, and how you place the audience sort of in the perspective of the foot soldier.
I have no issue with moving from film to digital. I think you need to embrace the movements that are happening technologically. And I actually think that sometimes looking at high definition images should be more embraced in films and not avoided. That it can be a texture that we can articulate in a higher level than is currently being used. I mean, we see most of this in nature films and such, and they're astounding. But we're not using them to the large extent in cinema, which is unfortunate. I do love the look of film, no question. In terms of Platoon, the question was?
It was a question you're saying that it was basically like Platoon was, the first movie to really put you in the shoes of the foot soldier and feel what that experience was like. And
well, a lot of that comes from Oliver, who was very particular about the images. But also, I think there was, neither one of us were highly experienced in terms of film. So, and it was a low-budget film. It was not a high-budget film by any means. And we're very limited with our resources. And it was about a platoon, so your number of people that you had to study. Also, there was a lot of fear. I don't actually want to sit through Platoon. I got to look at my work. And when I look at that work, I got like, oh, God, I can't believe you shot it like that. And one day Oliver came to me and said, I wish we were just a little bit older when we got into Platoon. Just more experience. So, I see so much of my own faults when I look at my work. But I do agree with you that, particularly when you see Charlie Sheen, that last shot in the helicopter, and he's looking down on all the death that's taken place. I remember watching this at La Brea Cinema, was it on La Brea? The first screening. It was all men. They were all from Vietnam, or had been some way about it. And when they left the theater, which took a long time, so many of them were in tears. And I was with a friend who had been with the Rangers, and he was in tears as well. And that's the highest praise you can get for a filmmaker like Oliver, to have that level of reception. And but that was remarkable for me too. I didn't go to Vietnam. Clearly, it was slightly before me. And I'd only had one experience with the war when I was shooting in El Salvador for a documentary. So I was limited, but I understood it to some extent.
Well, it is, Platoon is one of those rare movies that was, it's a great movie that was acclaimed at its time, was commercially successful, has endured, is now considered a classic. I mean, at what point did you realize that you were working on something special? Did you know how long?
I knew we were making a very special film immediately. Like the actors, the way the actors had been also trained. They were all acting as if they were in the military. They were taken out into really the jungles and having to survive and to go through false attacks by people. It was really a fascinating way to. They formed a unit under their own. If they were a corporal, private, sergeant, whatever it was, and they formed this unit. And that's what made that film so intensely personal, because they never felt out as like captain or whatever, they stuck to it. And it was remarkable for that. That was first.
And given that it was so early, relatively early in your career, I mean, what kinds of things did you learn on that movie that informed your approach going forward?
I learned not to shoot nights like that. No, I learned a lot. I learned, there was a lot of handheld in that movie. We were very rugged. The trains were almost impossible. I just learned to try to make less mistakes. And, at that time, exposure was so vital. Film is not digital. And we didn't have digital intermediates. So we were in a very difficult spot. You have to have proper exposure to put that up on a screen. And I wasn't quite at the level yet of getting the very best out of my work. It took me a while.
All right, well, let's just squeeze in one more question here before we go to Platoon. Yes, you in the center.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for this movie. We just saw it so beautiful. I wanted to say that I feel like when you talked about spirit being one of the aspects you wanted to put into the film, like the view of like God's view, I just wanted to say thanks, because I feel like at the beginning when Will Smith was in the scene when they're like, oh, how do you believe in God after, obviously it's not a great position we're all in. So I loved how at the end, towards the end of the film, the shots, the overview shots, I feel like they gave like the subject almost like a character of spirit in the film, like God being another character was very present in the film, and I feel like you achieved that so beautifully. I just want to say thanks.
I don't even think there was a question there.
All right, so I'll squeeze in one last question.
Thank you.
Thank you. you.
Go for it.
I'm a big fan of your work, and this is a very loving crowd for 35 millimeter. So, do you think this film could have been shot on 35 millimeter?
Another question, a film digital question, is if you think this film could have been shot on 35 millimeter.
And in your future work, are you passionate about shooting films on film?
Absolutely. I mean, if I shoot with Quentin, it'll be on film. There's no alternative to that.
You will see Will Smith again someday. Tell him everything's gonna be okay.
Everything will be good with Will.
Everything's gonna be okay. Everybody forgive him. He's made him be happy and he's teaching everybody to be kind.
All right.
Well, lesson on that one.
Okay, well, I think we're going to wrap things up here. So we've got another great movie to watch. Just out of curiosity, who here has never seen Platoon? All right, a few people. Well, you're in for a treat. It's a great movie, as was Emancipation. So thank you so much for